Hi there, and welcome to the Employment Insights podcast. This is our first podcast for 2023. Happy New Year. My name's Ian Pace. I'm a partner in the employment team based in Manchester. I'm joined again by my Northwest colleague, Rebecca Kearney, who's a principal associate based in our Liverpool office. Hi there, Rebecca.
Hi, Ian.
In this podcast, we're going to be discussing flexible working, what we mean by this, what the law currently is, and what the new proposals are, as well as potential impact for you and your business. So, Rebecca, why is flexible working such a hot topic at the moment?
Yeah, Ian, so the government has actually been reviewing the law on flexible working since around 2019, when they put forward a number of proposals under the Good Work Plan. Shortly after this, the flexible working was obviously pushed much higher up the agenda when the coronavirus pandemic hit in early 2020. And a lot of people at that point then began working from home. Sort of fast forward from them to the end of 2021, and the government launched a consultation on flexible working and whether reforms were required to the existing law, and if they were, to what extent. So now, post-pandemic, obviously flexible working still remains a priority for a lot of workers, wanting flexibility on when and where they work. And the response to the government consultation has now been published. It's called Making Flexible Working the Default, and there's a number of significant changes proposed. The government is also supporting the Employment Relations Flexible Working Bill, which passed its second reading on the 28th of October 2022. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it does sound like it. What is the current position then? What is the current law on flexible working?
Well, it only applies to employees, so agency workers, self-employed contractors, consultants, etc. are all excluded. And the right to request flexible working is only available to employees who have 26 weeks service. Aside from that, employers are actually only obliged to consider one request within a 12-month period, and they actually have 3 months to respond to the request, or longer if agreement is reached with the individual. It's very process driven, and you might be aware that there's 8 business reasons that make up the current list, as to reasons that an employer can reject a flexible working request. So just as a reminder, that includes extra costs that will be a burden on the business, the fact that work can't be reorganised amongst other staff, people can't be recruited to cover the work, flexibility will negatively affect quality, performance, or the business's ability to meet customer demand. And there's a lack of work to do during the proposed working times, or the business is planning structural changes. So a list of 8 reasons as to why an employer can refuse a request at the moment. Claims can currently be brought in the Employment Tribunal, but only for very limited reasons, such as a procedural failing. And employment tribunals have limited restrictions as to what they can review, so they can't look behind the business reason, and they can only award very limited compensation, and their role essentially is restricted to a review of the process, considering whether the request was taken seriously, whether the decision was based on correct facts, and whether the reason given was one of the 8 permitted business reasons.
Okay, so what are the new proposals then?
Well, the proposed changes will mean that the right to request flexible working will become a day one right. So rather than having to have 26 weeks service, it is a right to request, not an automatic right to have flexible working, but it will apply from day one of employment. The changes also propose that employees can make 2 requests within a 12-month period instead of 1, and employers must respond to that request within 2 months instead of 3. as perhaps most significantly, the proposed changes mean that employers will be required to consult with their employees as a means of exploring any alternative available options before rejecting a flexible working request. So it seems they've intended to simplify the process for requesting flexible working by removing the requirement for employees to set out how the effects of their flexible working request might be dealt with by the employer. And instead, employers should engage with employees to understand what the impact of the flexible working request would be. Just on that, there is no change to those 8 business reasons, so they will remain the same.
Okay, that's really clear. So obviously there's going to be, it looks like there's going to be a change to the flexible working request process. What exactly might this mean for business?
Yeah, so flexible working doesn't just cover, the combination of working from home and in the office. It can include employees making use of job sharing, flexi time, or working sort of compressed, annualised or staggered hours. So amongst other things, the government's proposed changes are intended to give employees greater access to flexibility over where, when and how they work. Some stakeholder responses to the consultation have expressed concern that allowing requests for flexible working from day one of employment might sort of pose unnecessary organisational logistical challenges. So, for example, in sectors such as education, where teachers are required to provide specific services at set times, or in hospitality, for example, where flexibility is often pre-built into roles, sort of because of the shift pattern nature of their work. The government has, however, decided to proceed with the proposal to encourage open conversations about flexible ways of working from the start of the employment relationship, and sort of bring the law into line with existing good practice. An interesting figure was that 69% of employers who responded to the consultation confirmed that they actually already accept requests for flexible working from day one of employment, which I thought was quite
Surprising.
interesting. Yeah. So sort of going forwards and kind of looking past the COVID-19 pandemic, the government also seems to be suggesting that ad hoc requests for flexible working might become more prevalent. So sort of suggesting that employers should be encouraged to have flexible working policies in place if they haven't already, and allowing employees to make informal requests for flexibility, which don't necessarily result in sort of long-term or contractual changes.
Okay, so we've talked about the consultation and the proposals in that consultation. Was there anything in the consultation that hasn't made the final cut?
Um, there was a proposal as to whether employers needed to provide sort of evidence as to why a request was due to be or had been rejected. It doesn't appear that the new legislation will impose any sort of evidential requirements on employers. There's a proposal that employers must produce a written notice to show that they had considered at least one alternative working arrangement, but that again was rejected due to concerns that it might reduce the request just to a tick box exercise or reduce the effectiveness of discussions between the parties. So those couple of things didn't make the cut.
That's really helpful. No, thanks very much for explaining all that, Rebecca. So in summary then, the government's consultation paper notes that primary legislation is required, but it hasn't actually set out any timetable or provided any draft legislation to put this into law. So with the government supporting the existing private members bill, it does seem likely that the proposals that you've discussed will be implemented soon. And obviously we'll update you as soon as we have any news of any developments on that. In the meantime, if you need any assistance with implementing any of the flexible working policies or dealing with requests, then please do feel free to contact either me on ian.pace@watemans.com or Rebecca on rebecca.kearney@watemans.com, and we'd be more than happy to help. Thank you again for listening, and again, Happy New Year. We'll be back in the next few weeks with more employment insights. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, Ian.